3 days before the biggest signing of the year, a company refused to pay a quiet single father $40 for 8 hours of honest work and told him to take it to court if he wanted it so badly. Nobody in that glass tower asked what he had spent the day doing or why his hands were still faintly gray with concrete dust while he waited at the payment counter for a form that never came. If you have ever been made to feel small over something that's small, stay with me because the number at the bottom of this story is going to surprise you. And I want you to hear how a $40 insult became a $12 million lesson. If stories like this one are why you're here, take a second now to subscribe so the next one finds you. Elias Mercer did not raise his voice. He did not slam his palm on the counter or demand a manager the way another man might have after being laughed at in front of a lobby full of strangers. He closed his laptop bag, slid a leather folder of photographs and readings back inside, and walked out into the cold autumn rain that had been falling over Chicago since morning, his collar turned up against the wind. He crossed the parking lot without once looking back. What none of them understood, not the receptionist who laughed under her breath, not the accountant who shrugged and moved to the next task, not the woman who had ordered him to wait, as though his time weighed nothing, was that the man leaving their building was the only inspector who had actually found the flaw buried inside their newest tower. A flaw that could unravel a deal worth more than $1 billion. In 72 hours, in front of bankers and reporters and partners watching from 3 continents, the room would go silent while investors stared at the very report the company had mocked. And 403 days after that, when the courts were finally done, the figure attached to Ashcroft Urban Holdings would read $12 million. Elias Mercer was 41, and he had built a steady life out of precision. He worked as an independent structural inspector, the kind of professional companies called when they needed a second set of eyes. They could trust someone with no stake in the outcome except the truth. He had been divorced for years and lived alone now in a modest apartment on the north side, raising a teenage daughter every other week. And his days were shaped by discipline rather than sentiment. He measured twice. He documented everything. He never signed his name to anything he had not personally verified. Colleagues described him the same way, almost without exception: unhurried, unshakable, the sort of man who could deliver bad news about a failing beam in the same even tone he used to discuss the weather. I had learned that steadiness early, back when a louder inspector might have been dismissed as an alarmist and ignored. Quiet certainty, he believed, carried further than noise ever could. It was the one thing his ex-wife had never understood about him, that a man could care enormously about something and still never raise his voice about it. His daughter understood it, though. She was 16 now, and when she was small, she used to sit on the workshop floor and watch him take a level to a shelf 3 times before he was satisfied, and once she had asked him why he checked things, nobody would ever check behind him. Because I'll know, he had told her. That was the whole of it. He would know. That morning, Ashcroft Urban Holdings had called him in on short notice. Their flagship tower needed an emergency inspection before a major investment could close, and their usual firm had a scheduling conflict. A frazzled project coordinator explained on the phone that the timeline could not slip, not even by a day. Elias cleared his calendar, packed his laser gear, his cameras, and his notebooks, and arrived before sunrise. He worked alone, as he always did, moving from the underground levels upward, pausing at every junction, every seam, every place where one material met another. By the time the sun cleared the skyline, he had logged more measurements than most inspectors took in a week. Something in the 3rd sub-level stopped him. He was running a gloved hand along a support column, half by habit, when the surface under his fingers told him something the blueprints on his tablet did not. He crouched, brought the light in close, and looked again. A section of reinforcement that did not match the specifications on file, the primary load-bearing beams under the tower's northern wing, had been built with a lower grade of steel than the plans called for. It was subtle. A rushed walkthrough would have missed it. A junior inspector might have walked right past it and gone home proud of a clean report. But Elias had spent 2 decades learning to notice exactly this kind of quiet substitution, the sort that saved a contractor money. Now, and left a building vulnerable under years of stress, under snow load, under wind, under the slow, patient weight of a full building living on top of it. He did not hurry. He photographed the section from 4 angles, laid his laser against it twice to confirm the deviation, and recorded a short video walking the length of the beam, so the context could not later be disputed. Then he wrote it into his notebook in the same careful hand he used for everything. and he kept going, finishing the rest of the survey exactly as thoroughly as he had started it. A man who let a single alarming finding rush the rest of the job was a man who missed the second finding. There was no second finding that day, but he did not know that until he had checked. When he finished, he handed a printed summary to the front desk, said a fuller report would follow that day, and asked politely about the $40 processing fee they had agreed on, separate from his full consulting invoice, which would be billed later. The woman at the counter frowned at her screen. "There's a hold," she said. "Something's missing from finance, a signature. I can't clear it myself." "I'll wait," Elias said, and set his equipment case down beside the bench. He waited nearly 2 hours beneath a wall of framed awards for architectural excellence. Employees passed with phones pressed to their ears and coffee cups in hand, the ordinary rhythm of a company convinced that nothing could touch it. A young man in a delivery uniform came in, dropped a package and left. A courier waited beside Elias for a while, was called up and was gone. Twice, Elias approached the desk and asked politely whether there had been any update. Twice, the receptionist gave the same apologetic shrug. "Finance runs disbursements on their own schedule," she said the second time, and she looked genuinely sorry about it. "There's honestly not much I can do to move it." "I understand," Elias said. "It's all right. I'll wait." He meant it, and something in the way he meant it seemed to unsettle her more than impatience would have. He thanked her and went back to reviewing his photographs on his tablet, and every so often his eyes drifted back to the images from the third sublevel, and the small, cold fact of them sat with him more heavily than the weight did. Eventually, the CEO herself crossed the lobby. Vivian Ashcroft was 39, sharp-featured in a tailored charcoal suit, and she noticed Elias only because an assistant murmured something about a vendor complaint. When she heard the whole holdup was $40, she laughed, a short, dismissive sound that carried across the marble. $40, she repeated loud enough for the cluster of staff nearby. "There are people in this building closing deals worth more than your yearly income before lunch, and you're going to stand here over $40. A few of the younger employees laughed with her, the kind of laughter that comes not from amusement, but from the instinct to stand where power stands. Elias met her eyes and said nothing, which seemed to irritate her more than any protest would have. "He can wait," she told her assistant, already turning away. "Finance will get to it." Her heels clicked sharply toward the executive elevators. When the accountant finally returned, it was with a form stamped, "Unpaid Services Pending Review." Elias read it once, signed it, and slid it back without a trace of frustration. He buttoned his coat and walked out through the revolving doors into the rain. Nobody who watched him leave imagined that the unremarkable man crossing the lot carried in a worn leather folder the single most important thing the company would need in the days ahead, or that his silence was not resignation, but the calm of a man who had learned long ago that dignity does not require a raised voice. On the drive home, he stopped at a red light and paged back through the images from the third sublevel. The deviation bothered him more the longer he looked. He parked outside his building and sat with the engine off, cross-referencing his laser readings against the manufacturer's specifications until he was certain there was no error in his own numbers. If left uncorrected, the deficiency would very likely fail to meet the standard the building's insurance underwriters required, and any serious investor's due diligence would eventually find the same thing, whether through his report or someone else's. The responsible course was simple. Someone at Ashcroft needed to know and needed to fix it before outside parties bet hundreds of millions on a safety rating that wasn't true. He had no interest in punishing anyone. He wanted the correction made. That evening, from his kitchen table, he composed a formal warning. He attached the photographs, the laser readings, and a plain technical explanation of the risk, and he recommended a follow-up inspection before any documents moved to outside parties. He sent it to the project manager and copied the engineering compliance address, then checked his inbox now and then out of habit rather than expectation. No reply came that night or the next morning. When he called to follow up, the line rang out 3 times before a receptionist finally picked up and told him awkwardly that his email address had been blocked from the company's system entirely. The order had come from Vivian, issued almost as an afterthought between 2 meetings after she was told a persistent inspector was still trying to reach her office. Miles Donovan, the company's chief counsel, told a junior staffer that nobody needed to bother the CEO over $40, and that if the man had a real concern, he could mail it the old-fashioned way, knowing exactly how long that took and how easily it could be lost. Elias did not escalate. He did not threaten a lawsuit. He simply saved everything. Every message he had sent time-stamped and sorted into a folder labeled with the building's address, along with the delivery confirmations and the bounce-backs that arrived once his address was cut off. Ha printed hard copies, to a habit from earlier years, and filed them in a binder in his home office. It was not anger, and it was not a plan for revenge. It was the same discipline that governed all his work, quietly building a record that no one at Ashcroft yet understood they would need. Inside the tower, preparations for the largest transaction in the company's history rolled forward, oblivious to the warning sitting unread in a blocked inbox on their own servers. Vivian was closing a deal worth $1,400,000,000 with one of the most respected investment funds in the country, an agreement that would turn a regional developer into a national name. Banners were quietly commissioned, catering was arranged, press releases were drafted before a single signature hit paper. All that week, Vivian gave interviews in which she spoke with total confidence about the soundness of her flagship property, insisting every inspection had come back clean and investors could trust the numbers completely. She believed it not because she had verified it, but because she had never needed to. Money had always solved her problems and quieted the people who might have told her otherwise. Rachel Kim was not so sure. At 35, she was the company's quality control director, the kind of employee whose work only becomes visible when something goes wrong. Assembling the final compliance binder for the fund's due diligence team, cross-checking every page against a checklist she had refined over years of closings. She found a gap: no final signed verification from the independent inspector who had completed the emergency survey. Without it, the package was technically incomplete. She brought it straight to Vivian, expecting a simple instruction. Instead, Vivian waved her off without looking up. "It's a formality from a contractor nobody will remember next week. Let it go." Rachel did not let it go. That evening alone, she pulled Elias Mercer's contact information from the vendor records and called a number she had been told not to use. They met the next afternoon in a coffee shop several blocks from the tower, chosen because neither of them wanted to be seen. Rachel took a table near the back where the espresso machine would cover their voices. When Elias came in carrying the same leather folder he had walked out with days earlier, she almost didn't recognize him without the lobby's fluorescent light washing him out. He ordered black coffee and sat across from her with none of the tension she'd expected from a man her company had treated so badly. He opened the files without hesitation and walked her through all of it: the photographs of the substituted steel, the laser measurements, the time-stamped video from the sub-level, and the record of every ignored email. He translated the technical language into terms she could follow, pointing to exactly where the installed material diverged from spec and what that meant for the tower under sustained load. "This grade here," he said, tapping the certification numbers on the screen, "is what the plans specify. This is what's actually in the beam. Under normal conditions, you'd never know, but a building isn't a normal condition. It's decades of load weather, the whole structure resting on those beams every hour of every day. You don't design for the good years. You design for the worst afternoon the building will ever have. And if nobody fixes it, then someday the building has that afternoon," he said, "and the beams were never rated for it." Rachel sat back. "Why didn't you just walk away after the lobby, after they blocked you? Most people would have." "Because I'd know," he said simply. "I never wanted a fight. I assumed a company this size would have a simple process for handling exactly this. Somebody corrects it, and everyone moves on." Rachel felt the color leave her face. She asked him pointed questions the way her training had taught her, hunting for any weakness or ambiguity that might explain why the company had dismissed him. She found none. Every measurement was documented, every photo time-stamped, every claim tied back to the original blueprints. By the time she finished, her hands were faintly trembling, not from fear exactly, but from the certainty that she was sitting across from the only person in the whole organization who had told the truth from the start. She went back to the office that same evening and laid the printed report on Vivian's desk, explaining as calmly as she could what the numbers meant and why the timing made them matter. Vivian barely glanced at the first page before her expression hardened. She picked up the report and tore it in half, letting the pieces fall between them. "I'm not letting a $40 contractor blow up a deal that took 18 months, she said. "Are we clear?" Rachel tried to explain the legal exposure, how a concealed structural defect could unravel far more than one transaction. But Vivian had already turned to the next thing on her desk. Within the hour, Rachel was called to Human Resources and told her position was eliminated effective immediately. Her badge was deactivated before she cleared her desk. Miles Donovan watched it unfold from down the hall and grew uneasy. He reminded Vivian, choosing his words carefully, that with Rachel gone, the company no longer had anyone internally tracking the independent records, and if the fund's technical team asked for the final documentation, there would be nothing complete to show them. No investor walks away from a deal this size over a missing signature, Vivian said. I'll handle any questions myself. Miles Donovan tried once more that same afternoon from the doorway of her office. Vivian, I've defended a lot of decisions for this company, he said. I can't defend one I don't understand. All he wanted was to be paid and to be heard. That's the entire problem. Both of those are free. Both of those are a distraction, she said without looking up. Close the door on your way out. He closed it. He would think about that afternoon for a long time afterward, the moment he had said the true thing and then done nothing when it was ignored. That afternoon, the fund's compliance department sent a routine but firm request for the final signed structural verification, rather than making the one phone call that would have fixed everything. A call that would have cost her nothing but a moment of humility. Vivian instructed a junior associate to produce a substitute. It recreated the format of Elias's report, but altered the critical findings to state that no deficiencies had been identified anywhere in the structure. She reviewed the falsified version herself, made a note about tightening the formatting to look more official, and approved, certain it would never be checked against the original. What Vivian did not know was that Noah Whitmore, the 56-year-old chairman of the fund, ran a standing forensic step on every large acquisition, and one of his analysts had already flagged something. The abrupt termination of Ashcroft's quality control director 3 days before closing had surfaced in a routine background scan. In Noah's experience, a company that loses the person who signs off on safety right before a sale is a company hiding something. Rather than raise it through official channels, he had his assistant pull the original inspector from the vendor records. Within a day, Elias Mercer received a letter requesting a private meeting signed personally by the chairman. They met in a plain conference room at the fund's offices. No marble, no glass, just a wooden table, a carafe of water, and windows over the river. Noah did not mention the $40 or the lobby, though he knew about both. He had spent enough years in business to know that how a company treats the smallest person in a deal often tells you more than any balance sheet. I'll ask you one thing, Noah said. Is the report with your name on it genuine? Elias opened his laptop and walked him through everything. The photographs, the laser measurements, the time-stamped video, the whole chain of ignored emails. He spoke without embellishment and let the data carry the weight. Noah leaned in to examine the images, asking sharp questions about tolerance thresholds and load calculations that made clear he understood more structural engineering than most executives bothered to learn. When Elias finished, Noah instructed his own engineers to verify every claim against the blueprints and the material certifications, a full review, not a glance. One more thing, Noah said near the end. The version your company mailed my compliance team last week says this building is clean. No deficiencies anywhere. You're telling me the opposite. Somebody is lying to me, Mr. Mercer, and I've spent 30 years learning to tell which one. He studied Elias for a moment. You're not raising your voice. You're not selling me anything. In my experience, the man with nothing to hide is usually the quiet one. I only have the measurements, Elias said. You don't have to take my word. Send your own people. Check the beam yourself. I intend to, Noah said. 2 days of quiet cross-checking followed, conducted by engineers Noah trusted, none of whom had any connection to Ashcroft or any reason to reach a particular conclusion. Their findings confirmed that Elias's original report was accurate down to the smallest detail, a full and precise match with no discrepancy anywhere in the data. The steel in the northern beams was exactly what Elias had said it was and exactly what the plan said it should not be. Noah froze the entire investment pending further review, but said nothing publicly. He wanted every fact in hand before he acted because he understood something. Vivian never had the point of leverage is not the moment you find the truth, it's the moment you choose to use it. Vivian, still approving banners and rehearsing her speech, had no idea the deal she believed was already secured had stopped moving 3 days before she was scheduled to sign it. The morning of the signing arrived with the polished confidence of a company that had never been told no. Ashcroft had turned its top floor into a showcase, reporters near the windows, bankers along a long glass table. partners from 3 continents watching on a live feed. Waiters circulated with coffee and sparkling water. Vivian stood at the head of the room in deep blue, delivering a speech about vision growth and the unshakable strength of her flagship property, gesturing toward the architectural renderings on easels, beside her entirely unaware of how literally that phrase was about to be tested. There was one guest few in the room recognized. Noah had asked Elias to attend, and Elias had agreed not to make a scene, but because he had decided that if the truth was going to be spoken, he would stand behind it in person, rather than let it be spoken for him. He sat quietly near the back in the same coat he had worn out of the lobby, the leather folder on his knee. As the final documents were placed on the table, Noah rose. The room quieted, uncertain whether this was part of the ceremony. He did not reach for a pen. He looked toward the back of the room and said, "Before anyone signs, I've asked the man who actually inspected this building to join us." Every head turned. Elias stood cross to the table without hurry and set his bound original report in the center, where every camera could see it, his photographs, his laser readings, his signature at the bottom of the final page. The very report Vivian had once torn in half. "You were sent a document last week that said this tower has no deficiencies." Elias said, his voice even carrying easily in the silence. "That isn't the report I wrote. This is. The northern load-bearing beams were built with steel below the grade the plans require. I documented it the day I inspected it, and I warned the company in writing. Those warnings were blocked." He looked at Vivian not unkindly. It could have been corrected in an afternoon. That's all it ever needed to be. For a moment, the room did not seem to understand. Then it did all at once. A hush spread as reporters leaned forward, phones already recording. One of the bankers reached for the falsified report in his own folder and set it beside the original on the table, and the 2 documents lay there in front of everyone, telling 2 different stories about the same building. Vivian's practiced smile faltered at the signature. She had never bothered to remember a name she had heard mentioned once in passing and had decided was not worth keeping. Noah addressed the room in the same measured tone he had used with Elias days earlier. His fund's own engineers had independently verified every finding he said, and the deficiency posed a direct risk to the safety rating underpinning the entire investment. The document previously submitted to his compliance team did not match this original in its critical findings, and his counsel would be reviewing how 2 conflicting reports had come to exist. The bankers exchanged uneasy glances. A reporter near the back was already typing furiously. Vivian opened her mouth to reach for the confidence that had carried her through every hard moment of her career. The same instinct that had once let her laugh off a man in her lobby. For the first time in longer than she could remember, no words came. Within the hour, the fund issued a formal statement suspending the transaction, citing material misrepresentation in the due diligence documentation. It was brief and carefully worded and made no direct accusation, though anyone reading between the lines understood. Under the preliminary agreement, both parties had already signed the suspension, triggered a penalty clause requiring Ashcroft to compensate the fund for costs, reputational damage, and lost opportunity. The final figure, calculated over the following days, came to $12 million. It appeared in financial headlines by the end of the week. News of the collapse moved from trading floors to industry newsletters within hours. By the next morning, Ashcroft's stock had fallen sharply, and several long-standing partners quietly began withdrawing from other ventures. Vivian attempted damage control through hastily arranged interviews, calling the discrepancy a simple misunderstanding between contractors. But the explanation convinced almost no one, least of all the reporters who had watched the moment happen live. As the fund's legal team opened its inquiry, Miles Donovan found the thing that turned an embarrassing failure into serious legal exposure. Working late to prepare a defense, he asked a technician to restore the blocked email account, expecting to find nothing of consequence. Instead, untouched since the day it was cut off, sat the complete chain of Elias's messages each time, stamped each detailing the exact deficiency, later confirmed by independent engineers, each met with silence or obstruction. He read the chain twice, his stomach sinking. The record made clear the company had not merely overlooked a risk. It had been warned in writing repeatedly and had chosen to block the warning fire, the person who raised it internally, and manufacture a false document rather than fix the problem while there was still time. The fund's attorneys requested all internal correspondence related to the inspection, along with sworn statements. Rachel Kim, though no longer employed there, agreed without hesitation to give a full account. She sat in a conference room across from 3 lawyers and told them exactly what she had seen: the gap in the compliance binder, the conversation at Vivian's desk, the sound the report made when it tore the termination that came the same afternoon. She did not exaggerate a single detail. She did not need to. Her dates and her account matched the recovered emails precisely line for line, and together they left Ashcroft's lawyers almost no room to maneuver. There is a particular quiet that settles over a legal team when they realize the other side is simply telling the truth and can prove it. That quiet settled over the room early and never lifted. Vivian was formally required to accept responsibility for authorizing the falsified document, which carried both financial penalties and professional consequences that would follow her well past the settlement. Miles Donovan resigned within the week. He cleared his office on a Friday evening after everyone had gone, and on his way out, he stopped at the front desk in the lobby, the same counter where a man had once waited 2 hours for $40, and stood there a moment, looking at the leather bench beneath the awards wall. Then he left. He told a colleague later that he could not keep defending decisions he had warned against from the beginning, and that the whole disaster had turned on a single afternoon when correcting the problem would have cost the company nothing but a little humility, and it hadn't had any to spare. About a week after the collapsed signing, Vivian asked through an intermediary whether Elias would meet her. She had spent those days largely out of view, fielding calls from her board and her attorneys. And somewhere in that week, she had found herself returning again and again to the lobby, replaying the sound of her own laughter, and wondering for the first time in longer than she could recall whether she had misjudged something important. Elias agreed and chose the same coffee shop where Rachel had once brought him her worries, a quiet place with wooden tables and rain-streaked windows far from glass towers and boardrooms. Vivian arrived alone, without the entourage of assistants and lawyers that usually surrounded her, dressed more plainly than at any point in the ordeal. She sat down across from him, carrying a small folder of her own. For a moment neither of them spoke, and the espresso machine filled the silence the way it had the first time he sat there. "I've replayed that lobby 100 times, she finally said. "I keep waiting to find the version where I did something different. I can't find it. I just didn't look at you." She opened the folder. Inside was a cashier's check and a written apology she had drafted and redrafted the night before. She placed both on the table along with 2 crisp $20 bills, the exact sum that had started everything. Elias looked at the check a long moment, then slid it back untouched. He picked up only the $40, folded the 2 bills, and put them in his coat pocket. "I never needed your money," he said. "I needed you to keep your word." This could have ended the first afternoon if someone had treated an ordinary request with ordinary respect. Vivian pushed the check toward him again, insisting the damage to his time and his name deserved real compensation. He shook his head. "It was never about the money," he said. "It never is." She sat in silence, the weight of it settling more heavily than any legal penalty had managed to. She had looked at a man waiting quietly in her lobby and decided he wasn't worth her attention. 3 days later, that single decision, made in a moment of careless pride, had cost her company $12 million, driven off partners who had trusted her for years, and unraveled a reputation she had spent her whole career building. She left the coffee shop without the check ever accepted, carrying instead a lesson she would spend a long time absorbing: that the people you can afford to ignore are usually the ones who can least afford to be ignored, and that the bill for ignoring them always arrives eventually with interest. The final judgment came 403 days after the afternoon in the lobby when the last of the settlements and reviews closed and Ashcroft Urban Holdings signed the $12 million figure into the record, 403 days for a $40 insult to finish its arithmetic. In the months between, Elias Mercer's practice grew steadily, his name passing quietly among developers and investment firms as someone whose word could be trusted completely, someone who documented everything and compromised on nothing, no matter who sat across the table. Requests began arriving faster than he could accept them, many from companies that had heard the story secondhand and wanted, above all, an inspector who could not be pressured or dismissed. He remained the same in every meeting, early, careful, refusing to sign anything he had not personally verified. His daughter read about the case in a business article a classmate had shared, and she called him that night half laughing, half proud. "You didn't tell me you blew up $1 billion deal, Dad." "I didn't blow up anything," he said. "I just wrote down what was true, and then I waited." That she told him was the most dad sentence she had ever heard. Noah Whitmore, impressed by his composure, invited him to join the fund as a senior risk advisor, a role Elias accepted only on the condition that he could keep doing his own field inspections, unwilling to give up the work that had shaped him. Rachel Kim, after several difficult weeks, found a position at a firm that valued exactly the kind of careful, unglamorous diligence that had once cost her a job. She often thought back to the evening she made that call, a decision that had felt reckless at the time, and understood it later as the moment she had chosen to trust her own judgment over the comfort of staying quiet. The story of the man refused $40, and the company that lost $12 million because of it began circulating as a quiet lesson about the true cost of arrogance. It was repeated at conferences and cited in the occasional article about corporate governance, usually stripped of the human part: the 2 hours on a leather bench, the rain, the torn report, the phone call that was never made. It became over time a reminder that the respect owed to any person, whatever the size of the transaction, is never as small as it looks in the moment it's withheld. Ashcroft Urban Holdings had spent more than a decade building a name, and it came apart in a matter of days over a decision that seemed at the time almost too small to matter. That was the whole point. The real measure of a company is not how it treats its largest partners when everyone is watching and the incentives are obvious. It's how it treats the ordinary, quiet people it assumes no one is watching at all. So here's my question for you. If you'd been in that lobby, would you have stayed calm the way Elias did, or would you have demanded to be heard? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story was worth your time tonight, do me a small favor and subscribe before you go, because the next one is already written and waiting for you.